which is that I have an empty Minikube cluster.
So is this just locally?
Yeah, I'm just waiting to see what happens with GCP here, because it seems to be a bit weird.
So is there anything I should do to configure kube control locally, or do I have to wait until the GCP is spun up?
No, you can use you can just use the Minikube one for the moment. So if you do kube control get pods, when you did Minikube start, it should have already configured kube control for you. So if you do kube control get pods, in theory, if that's all come up correctly, you should have no resources found in default namespace.
Yeah, I do. It doesn't seem like a successful response, but yeah, that's what I see.
Yeah, it's yeah. Nice to see you not doing anything. Hope you're okay. So,
yeah, I'm okay not doing anything.
Yeah, so that's fine. I mean, what you can actually do is get all there's not really much to see, to be absolutely honest.
And then what is this concept of a pod?
So a pod is normally it's one container. Sometimes you get a couple of containers working together, but it's effectively a unit of work. So a process or a process with some sort of helper process alongside it, but two things that are basically constitute a task or a service or whatever. So, for example, if well, actually, an example I can give. So in the Kubernetes has got its like kind of control namespace called kube system. So that's what -n does, and it looks at everything within that namespace. So within that, there's a number of things already running, which are what's the Kubernetes dashboard version? Which are all doing individual tasks or effectively running processes. You'll see most of them have this 1/1, which means that they are pods which contain one container. So in other words, it's basically the equivalent of container. You'll see a couple of exceptions. Here we've got 3/3, so there's actually 3 containers running together. And potentially you might find that when one of them is exporting logs or doing backup processes or acting as a proxy for some connection or something, you might have another container running alongside. But most...
So it's groups of containers, but oftentimes it's just one container.
Exactly.
Okay. Performing specific tasks or services.
Yeah. And what you'll see when I fire this Arches one up is, I think most of it I've got is just one container. There's normally relatively specific reasons that you might want another one. So that's the pods. The services are effectively kind of a simple service discovery approach where service has a name and it's got some sort of matching rule to pods. So I can, from anywhere in the cluster, I can say I want kubedns, and it'll go off and go, oh, there is a pod which matches certain criteria called kubedns, blah, 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 and it will route there. If it finds several of them, so for example, if I've scaled it up to try and basically, a dozen different containers to load balance between, it's bright enough to just do round robin load balancing. So if I've got half a dozen DNS containers that match the criteria, and I try and do a request to kubedns service, it will basically pass it to one of those 6 processes, and I don't need to know their exact addresses or anything like that. I can just hit this kubedns endpoint. So
it'll just pass it to one of them or to all of them?
It will pass each request to one of them, but it will cycle them basically.
Okay, and you just don't care which one necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a very basic load balancer, really. So The others are probably less. Oh, well, the other one that's worth bearing in mind is a deployment. So a deployment is essentially a template for pods, and you can say how many replicas of one you want. So say, for example, I know there's going to be a whole load of DNS load. I could say I want 6 DNS pods. So I create a deployment that's got the template for what that pod's definition, what Docker container it's running, and what security policies or whatever it's got, and then it says how many of them I want.
And do you manually configure that?
Yeah.
Or does it come? Okay.
Yeah. So this all gets configured really as infrastructure as code in most cases. So that's the stuff that will get set in the Helm files in YAML markup. And then as it's all running, you can deploy changes to it, and Kubernetes is smart enough to kind of roll those out gradually and not break everything when they're coming online, in theory. Sure. So if he's getting logged in. Not entirely obvious. I feel like there's something really obvious I'm missing here. I'm not quite sure what. Some doesn't seem to be IP logs. Anyhow. Let me just quickly check here. Because I have to admit, I just saw autopilot there and thought that's going to save me a bit of effort. But oh, it really is entirely. Connect. Let's try and Helm Chart. Okay, I'll keep going on Minikube for so yeah, I can switch back to Minikube, like so. Let's be back on local VM. Okay, so I guess one thing we talked through the last time is the Docker Compose. Now I've just I haven't spent a lot of time updating our Docker Compose approach to what you guys are working on, which I think is good to do. But for the sake of keeping the workshop consistent, I've just done it basically the same way. So you can see yourself now, that was what I meant to do.
Well, so this brings about something we were wondering. Are you using the same Docker Compose that's in the root of Arches, or you have your own custom Docker Compose file for this?
We're trying to use the same one as much as possible. I can actually show you what. So I have. I think that was in a fork, have I? No, I don't. Okay, that's not very helpful. Give me 1 sec here. And then you can see this.
And are you using the same? I mean, I guess if you're using that Docker Compose, you're probably using the same Docker file and entry point files that are in there.
Yeah, so by and large, there were a couple of tweaks I had to make, I think. Let me just take a fork here and push it. So that's okay. Just so you've got a copy of that there. Chat. But the difference to 5.1.3, what have I done? I have, yeah, I think there were a couple of minor changes to yarn I needed back in 5.1. So I'm sure that's then there was some of the templating stuff I needed to remove to get it working okay. But again, I think those are more things that can be tidied up. It's one of the reasons I'm less inclined to do an MR straight away. Then, oh yeah, I moved the port to 80 and 443, which is high enough up, they're not clashing. I needed the cryptography library for some reason, I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, you can see it's pretty minor changes, really.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly stuff that just is artifacts of me trying to do this rather than necessarily things that need upstreamed. Now, if I go to...
Do you find that the current Dockerfile entry point and Docker Compose file mostly meet your needs? I mean, so one thing, for instance, when I was using it is oftentimes, and you might run into this too, you're probably deploying existing projects, right? You're not necessarily always creating a new Arches project. And I know that the Docker, I think, entry point file kind of assumes that you're creating a new project a lot of the time, unless a database exists.
Yeah, I get you. Well, to be perfectly honest, mostly it's been greenfield for us, but because we're relatively recent, I suppose, in the grand scheme. But well, actually, yes. So I should just make that forward. So I should say the actual one that we're using for doing an individual project, we tweaked a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that maybe mitigates some of it, but possibly. So we, I actually need to push this up here, but let me just see. Okay. Let's wait for me to do this. I should tell you what, let me.
I mean, I guess what I'm really getting at is that we've been modifying the Docker files internally, and we have different branches that they're on. And we're wondering, like, would it totally hose your workflow if we were to change those? Or do you have, it sounds like you might have your own separate set of Docker Compose and Docker files for your work, for your project.
I would say we've tried to keep as in line as possible with the upstream ones. It doesn't mean that we can't adapt, Mm-hmm. What you'll see here is that we've got the normal Arches container, but really what we've done is introduce some variables for having and
it looks like Docker with Docker group Arches project latest. The image you have there, is that just a standard Arches image that you guys created?
Well, this is it. So basically, we've got the build context. So from the Docker file, that's where we're putting in. That's where we're putting in basically the other than those minor 1 or 2 line tweaks, the Docker file that we are. Where's it gone? Oh, it's in Docker. So essentially, this here is pretty much the standard Docker image. Mm-hmm. I just got that locally from that Arches folder off that branch. I've just stuck a link in the channel. Yeah. So that's pretty much a standard Arches. Then we do a couple of tweaks. There, make the Arches, went in, yarn install. That's it. So nothing I think probably the most significant thing is we've dropped the privileges, possibly.
And it looks like you're copying an Arches project from your local. If you go back to that, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Looks
Yes.
like line 5. You're copying the project. So that's like an existing project.
Well, I just went through. To be fair, I did just go through the create project workflow.
Okay.
So that's so it's an existing project in that it was created just before I did this. But yeah.
But if you're deploying a project that already exists, for instance.
How would that differ? I guess anything stateful would need to be imported into the DB or Elastic. But I mean, the idea of this was actually when we were doing the Antarctic piece, we wanted to basically customize some of the assets and things, which is fairly basic editing of the project here, and we found that this workflow worked fine for that. So if I make changes to the actual project, so this I'm less familiar with, so correct me if I'm wrong, but or missing anything. But if we had to make some changes to the settings local and settings file.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, that flow that we've got there just takes whatever modifications you've got in the project and mounts it in to create a combined Docker image. So in theory, I can't see any reason it wouldn't work with a pre-existing project if you modify the settings files appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
I guess everything that we've done is kind of assumed Arches 5, but that's the only other thing.
Arches 5 as opposed, I mean,
that's been around for a while now. So
yeah. I mean,
so
I'm not sure we've deployed Arches 4.
Yeah, so I don't really think. I mean, if I go here, so this Docker compose. This Docker compose, I've got a worker. So the only other things I've done is I've added a worker and RabbitMQ and CouchDB, I think, as well.
Mm-hmm. Celery worker, that is.
Yeah. I think that's celery somewhere in here. I don't quite know where celery's gone. But anyway.
No, it was there. I thought it was at least Arches. You had a container called Arches worker, I think.
Yeah. I was just wondering, I thought I had a celery server in there. Oh, it's using Rabbit, that's right, sorry, of course. So
and then you mount the entry point. Okay.
Yes, so the entry point, let's see. There's a couple of things.
The worker has access to a lot of stuff, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, so at the moment, what I've done with the Docker compose is keep it reasonably standard. In particular, it's got, it's got access to everything. It's not really the main process has. The other thing about this is that, well, the entry point is updated to add. Right, so this is the first kind of Kubernetes-y thing that's maybe worth highlighting is, as well as doing the dynamic build, I do a static build for Nginx. So rather than trying to serve the front end, is let's build Docker here. So one of the challenges, so I have this Docker file.static, which uses a dummy Django settings secret key, but otherwise takes fairly sensible variables, and then runs that in at Yarn components. We've got a settings static that basically tries to make sure that it's writing to standard out and standard error instead of a log file. And then that does collect static rail. Now that collect static rail, I had to make a couple of tweaks to get it to work in Docker build, but nothing dramatic. And then the last bit is it copies everything across into a folder for basically just Nginx. So that Nginx I'm privileged with those static files, and that's it. Which is kind of nice. So that then means that effectively the Arch's installation comes to Docker images.
Yeah, the static in the app.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, for the Docker Compose, I think I just run npm, but I could easily swap that over to the static Nginx. Obviously, that's not then going to update when you change code and things. But having got those two, the Helm.
And then you're still containerizing then in this particular setup, you're still containerizing the DB and Elasticsearch and all that stuff. I might have been in your Docker Compose. I just wasn't paying attention to because we were looking at other stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't really matter too much. So Docker Compose, the only purpose of it really is to try and let me debug stuff consistently with what's happening with Kubernetes. But yeah, there's no reason it has to be. So if I go in here, so this is the actual Helm chart. Now this matches up with with this here, which is, it's still obviously kind of early days, but this has got the definitions, and this values file is one that really contains the this contains a kind of default set of environment variables. So in this case, yeah, we set up Postgres in the cluster, just again, dummy variables.
So does this supersede the environment variables in the Docker Compose file, for instance, or?
Well, this is, once it goes on to Kubernetes, Docker Compose file doesn't really exist. It's
okay.
Kubernetes is kind of
Kubernetes...
Docker Compose. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So Kubernetes is effectively an alternative to Docker Compose. Think of it that way.
And then does it use any of the Docker files? Like, for instance, does it use the Docker file?
Yes.
So
it uses, okay. Yes. So all the Docker files it does use, and I mean, you can certainly see a lot of parallels between how it's configured, but
for sure.
But yes, Docker Compose doesn't exist in Kubernetes world. No.
So if I were to try to get like we have a dev set up in Docker for Arches, if I were to try to get that onto Kubernetes, and I'm not sure why I would, because it sounds like Kubernetes is great for production, but just as practice, basically, where would I start? I mean, would I start by making a Helm file?
So the flow that I would suggest is, obviously what we want to do is get your Docker files kind of basically what we were doing, following that as much as possible. But for the moment, we've got, where am I? What window am I in? What am I doing? Oh, wait, sorry. There we don't go. There we go. Okay, so we've got this Docker Compose. Now, the way I've set it up is that I can do Docker Compose build, and it'll give me those tagged images. So if I do Docker Compose, yeah, there we go. So I can basically say I want Docker group is Flax and Teal, Arch project is workshop 2, and then Docker compose build, and that will give me those 2 Docker images. The static one and the non-static one.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I'm not sure I followed the commands. You have Docker group and Arch project as variables, but before your command, I'm not sure I followed that. Is it?
Oh, well, as in just that's what will be used in the Docker file. So if I go our Docker compose file, so if I go in here, you'll see we use the
okay. So maybe it's just I think it's just the order you have them in the command file and the command line that's confusing. But yeah, it's fine. Whatever.
Yeah,
so
I
it's
mean
the same. It's the same command line argument. It's just you put them before the command.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
so that brings up those 2.
And then basically I can push those. Push. There we go. So in this particular case, for the sake of simplicity, I've just pushed the Docker hub. Obviously, you can configure private Docker repository or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
There is a way of doing it with Minikube, just doing it locally, but it's a little, well, actually recent Minikube is not too much. Whatever. And so push those 2 up. Then that's basically, as far as your local stuff's concerned, that's you done and dusted. In continuous integration, that basically runs as one of the steps on, say, GitLab or GitHub Actions or whatever. So from that point, the Kubernetes cluster, wherever it is just responsible for going and getting those. And if I go to that repo that I'm showing you, so I've got some stuff for setting up NFS there. Yeah, so this, you can clone this down. You can actually do it, strictly speaking, you can do Helm repo add Arches project, and we've got basically a GitHub pages. Actually, we can use GitHub pages to create this. So it's kind of almost like a package repository, but for this Arches project chart, Helm chart. And
so
then,
like different Helm files for, sorry, a package repository.
Oh, sorry. So
of Helm files, or?
Yeah, exactly. So you see there that is flaxandteal.github.io/helmarches. So that matches up to basically just saying get the templates from this Git repo.
Okay.
So really what you're doing is putting up the Docker images to some sort of registry. Getting the templates from here, and then the third ingredient is whatever secrets you want to override it with now, or other config that you want to override it with that's non-standard. So,
and that's what you put in that Helm config file that you showed me?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So there's a number of ways of doing this, but for simplicity now, let's see if this works. It's been it must be better demonstrating the ones that we actually have running than but anyway, so in theory, fascinated to see what happens here. Is that just as next time, or is that still trying to connect to GCP? No, it's still trying to connect to GCP. Yes, it is. What? Oh, yeah, okay. That's right. So Helm install, yeah. Okay, that was much faster. So now, if I do this kube control get pods, now I haven't configured this, so it doesn't know where those images are or anything, so it's just doing a default setup. I just want to sort of show that effectively you can get a default setup with 2 commands. So that's Helm repo and then Helm install. And that's already starting to create some of this stuff on Minikube. Now, it's image pull back off. Why is that? Oh, okay. So yeah, okay. So basically, because I've used just the standard config without really configuring it for what I'm currently trying to do. Let me just take a copy of that values, those default values, and then fill out what I need to. Okay, so this value is found here, and then that's going to be localhost, repository, right? So I pushed up that workshop 2. I haven't actually tried this yet, so I'm going to try static 5.1. I think I called them 5.1, didn't I? No, I did not. Okay. Yes. Etc. Right. So now I can actually, so I've just made some changes there. I can actually do an upgrade and use my custom values. What am I doing wrong? Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. Back. Okay. So there's some, I think I've just changed versions accidentally. I don't know. There we go. Oh, okay. That's on the right version. Try that now. So hopefully that should now be doing same thing except with those new images. No, I haven't really given it enough memory to try and run Elasticsearch too, so it's sitting pending. Image going back off. Oh. think I've got 2 versions.
Yeah, I might have to cut this short in a few moments. I probably have to go relieve my wife.
Okay, that's right. I mean, what I'm going to do is there's a couple of scripts I've put together for this really, which I was going to try and push up, but I think having the Minikube issue, I might try and develop first. Those are currently downloading those images, but basically what I should have at that point, oops, sudo please. I think he really doesn't like me today.
It's because there's a demo.
Yeah, you know what? You're probably not wrong. I don't know why it's telling me it doesn't exist, because I've literally been connected to it before actually. You know what? Okay. There we go. Well, at least that tells me where the thing is. That's still creating those. Okay, well, essentially once that comes up, that should be available. Yeah, I should be able to get basically the standard arches view on that. And you can see there, got CouchDB starting, Postgres, and Rabbit. And then within that values file, it's kind of the config for those, so you can override even the bits of the Postgres config and how it's running, and CouchDB and RabbitMQ and so forth. Which means that you can, gotcha. Which means that you can point it to other places as well. So if you wanted to point it to RDS, for example, or external cloud.
This is where you can configure that.
Yeah, exactly. And also things like, so we use so a variety of approaches you can use for this, but one approach we use is SOTS, which is basically a way of running encrypted secrets. And actually, there's kind of a nice format for providing an encrypted secrets file. Again, you can do this in CI. And then that encrypted secret file is basically a YAML structure of the secrets that need to get passed through to individual processes, or individual pods, or individual cron jobs, or whatever. Get those from there. So, it's just still pulling it. It's probably because I'm on 4G here, just slightly frustrating. Anyway, I mean, I suppose probably what makes sense is if I get that, those kind of setup scripts, I have spent quite a bit of time trying to work on those, so those should be useful to help get it set up, at least in Minikube. What we could maybe do is, if we can bounce back and forward and get you set up as well, then we could maybe do a bit more of a dive into the limitations and what needs fixed, and see if anyone else wants to join us. I know the Heritage folks have been looking into this in parallel as well, so it might be good to see if we can get